"If you want to live, hug me," the rancher pleaded to the Apache woman on the ice. Snow lay thick over the rolling hills, and the frozen river that cut through the land was a bright sheet of ice, glistening under the pale morning sun. Thomas Miller, a middle-aged rancher with strong, calloused hands and a weathered face, was making his way across this treacherous landscape. He had lived most of his life on this land, knowing the moods of the river, the snow, and the animals. Yet even with all his experience, the river seemed to whisper danger, reminding him that nature always held the upper hand. Thomas had loaded his wagon with supplies for the ranch: hay for the cattle, blankets for the winter nights, and a small amount of food for himself. His horse, a sturdy brown mare named Daisy, plodded carefully on the icy ground, hooves clattering against the frozen surface. Thomas squinted at the river ahead. He had crossed it many times before, but the ice this season was different. It groaned and cracked in uneven patterns, unpredictable as the wind. Still, he had no choice. The supplies had to reach the other side. As he carefully guided Daisy forward, he felt a sudden shiver of unease. The ice beneath the wagon creaked loudly, sending tiny cracks spiderwebbing outward. The wagon rocked, and Thomas's heart raced. He knew he had to be cautious. One wrong step, one misjudgment, and both he and the supplies could be lost to the freezing water below. His breath came out in white clouds, mixing with the chill that cut through his heavy coat. Every step forward felt like a gamble. Suddenly, from the far bank, a figure appeared. At first, Thomas thought he was seeing a trick of the light, a shadow dancing on the snow. But then the figure moved, deliberate and quiet. She was a young woman, her dark hair tucked beneath a simple hood, eyes sharp and alert. Thomas's heart thumped in surprise and curiosity. He knew the land was near Apache territory, and encounters were rare but not unheard of. Yet he could not help but notice the confidence in her movements, the way she seemed at home on the ice, despite its dangers. The woman did not speak at first. She simply watched him, her dark eyes calculating every motion, as if measuring whether he was friend or foe. Thomas waved a hand, not wanting to appear threatening. "Hello there," he called, his voice a little shaky. Can you help me?" The woman tilted her head, silent. Thomas's heart sank a little. He realized he was alone in the middle of a frozen river, and help might not come unless she chose to give it. A small wave of fear ran through him, but he had no time to dwell. The ice under the wagon suddenly shifted. A long, sharp crack ran along the frozen surface, and the wagon jolted violently. Daisy whinnied, her hooves slipping, and Thomas grabbed the reins tightly. "Steady, girl, steady," he muttered, his voice firm but laced with panic. The cold wind whipped across the river, biting at his face. He could see the icy water glimmering through the cracks below. The danger was immediate. He had to act, and quickly. It was then that instinct took over. Thomas felt a surge of desperation unlike anything he had experienced before. He needed help, and he needed it now. He looked toward the young woman. "If you want to live, hug me," he shouted across the ice. His voice was raw with fear, trembling but loud enough to reach her. The words startled the woman. She blinked, unsure what he meant, but she sensed the urgency, the sheer honesty in his plea. Slowly, carefully, she began to move closer, her steps measured, testing the ice as she came. Thomas tried to stay calm, his mind racing with thoughts of what could go wrong. Every second counted. The ice groaned beneath them, a warning that nature itself was watching, waiting to see if they would survive. As the woman reached him, Thomas felt a strange mix of relief and tension. He extended a hand, and she mirrored the gesture, cautious yet willing. They were two strangers from different worlds, brought together by circumstance and a shared need to survive. He could feel the icy wind cutting through their clothes, the snow settling on their shoulders, and the relentless cold pressing in from every direction. Yet in that moment, fear gave way to connection. Carefully, they balanced their weight, inching across the treacherous ice together. Thomas guided Daisy slowly, speaking in calm tones to reassure both the horse and the woman beside him. They moved like dancers, each step deliberate, each movement in harmony with the ice and with each other. The tension was almost unbearable. One slip, one miscalculation, and the freezing water would claim them both. As they walked, Thomas stole glances at the woman. Her expression was focused, determined, yet there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. He realized that despite the danger, she was assessing him, learning who he was in that moment of crisis. He wondered about her life, her skills, her courage. She was not just a passerby. She was a person with her own story, as complex and rich as his own. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, but finally the ice beneath their feet began to feel more solid. The cracks were fewer, the surface more forgiving. Thomas allowed himself a quiet sigh of relief, though he kept his voice low, careful not to let the moment of safety fade too soon. The woman beside him mirrored the gesture, her tension slowly easing as they reached the firmer ground near the far bank. Once on solid earth, Thomas patted Daisy's neck, murmuring soothing words to calm the horse. He looked at the woman, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice husky from cold and fear. I wouldn't have made it without you." The woman nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. She did not speak, but her presence was reassuring, grounding Thomas in a way he had not expected. He realized that in the midst of danger, a connection had been formed, fragile but undeniable. They stood there for a moment, catching their breath, watching the river glisten under the pale sun. Thomas could feel his body thawing slightly, the adrenaline giving way to exhaustion. Yet his mind was alive, alert, replaying the moment over and over. The words he had shouted across the ice, so desperate, so human, still echoed in his memory. They were a reminder of his vulnerability, of the thin line between life and death, and of the unexpected ways help could arrive. For the first time in many years, Thomas felt a spark of something he had not known for a long time: trust. It was fragile, tentative, and uncertain, but it was there. He looked at the woman again, sensing her strength, her skill, her quiet courage. He knew that this encounter, this chance meeting on the frozen river, would stay with him forever. It was a moment that defined him, tested him, and changed him in ways he could not yet fully understand. As they began to move away from the river, Thomas spoke again, his voice softer now. "What's your name?" he asked. The woman hesitated, then replied in a voice as soft and strong as the winter wind, "Nea." Thomas nodded, committing the name to memory. "I'm Thomas," he said. "Thank you, Nea, truly." Together they walked toward the trees that marked the edge of the river, each step a careful dance over snow and ice, each breath a mix of cold and relief. Thomas knew the journey was not over, that the winter held more challenges, more dangers. But he also knew that he was not alone. In the heart of the frozen wilderness, on the fragile ice of a treacherous river, two strangers had found a connection born of courage, trust, and the sheer will to survive. And in that moment, Thomas Miller understood something profound. Sometimes, survival did not come from strength or skill alone. Sometimes it came from reaching out, from trusting another human being, and from daring to hope that help could come in the most unexpected forms. The river behind them now lay quiet, its frozen surface reflecting the pale winter sun. Thomas Miller and Nea stood on the snow-covered bank, both still catching their breath. The sound of the wind whipping through the trees and the distant creaking of ice reminded Thomas of the danger they had just escaped. He looked at Nea, noticing her calmness, the way she had measured every step, every movement, and guided them safely across. He felt a deep sense of respect for her, stronger than anything he had felt in years. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding. Thomas had always been cautious around strangers, especially those from different cultures, but Nea's presence felt different. She exuded a quiet confidence, a knowledge of the land that he could only admire. And yet there was something more, a hint of kindness, a willingness to help a stranger in need. Thomas wondered about her life, her family, her journey, and the experiences that had made her so skilled, so self-assured. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice breaking the quiet. "That was close," he said, shaking his head. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Nea's dark eyes met his. She did not speak at first. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of caution and thoughtfulness. Thomas waited, realizing that trust was something that had to be earned. You saved me," he continued. I owe you my life." For a moment she simply nodded. Then softly she said, "We are safe now." Her English was limited, but her words carried weight. She had seen danger many times, perhaps more than Thomas could imagine, and she knew that the river was only the beginning of winter's challenges. Her voice, calm and steady, reassured him more than he could have anticipated. Thomas looked around. The riverbank was desolate, with only the occasional snow-laden tree breaking the horizon. The wind blew sharply, and the cold pressed against their coats and scarves. He realized that even though they had escaped the immediate danger, the harsh winter still surrounded them. His supplies were in the wagon behind them, precariously balanced, and he would need to ensure they reached safety before nightfall. "Will you help me with the wagon?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's heavy and the ice is tricky." Nea studied him for a moment, then moved closer to the wagon, her steps careful on the snow. Thomas noticed her balance, the way she shifted her weight lightly, almost as if she were part of the river itself. She crouched slightly, inspecting the cracked ice beneath the wheels. With a quiet nod, she signaled him to follow her instructions. Thomas carefully moved the wagon, following her directions. Step by step, they inched forward, avoiding the largest cracks and the areas that looked weak. Time seemed to stretch. The wind bit at Thomas's face, and his fingers ached from the cold, even inside his gloves. Yet with each careful movement, he felt a growing sense of connection with Nea. They were two strangers, yet working together in silence, trusting each other completely. It was a bond formed not by words, but by action, by the shared understanding that their survival depended on cooperation. After what felt like hours, though in reality was less than an hour, the wagon reached a safer part of the riverbank. Thomas exhaled, relief flooding his body. "We made it," he said, his voice hoarse from shouting and cold. Daisy, the mare, whinnied softly, sensing the relief in her master. Thomas patted her neck, then turned to Nea. I don't even know how to thank you properly," he admitted. Nea shrugged lightly, her eyes flicking to the distant horizon. "Help each other survive," she said simply. Her words were not many, but Thomas understood. In her world, survival was not a matter of pride or recognition. It was a matter of life itself. And yet, there was something in her tone that hinted at more than mere practicality, something warm and human that reached him deep in his chest. As they worked together to unload some of the wagon supplies, Thomas found himself talking more, almost without realizing it. He spoke of the ranch, the animals, the long winter nights, and the loneliness that often came with living in such remote lands. Nea listened, occasionally nodding, occasionally offering a single word or gesture of understanding. Though their languages and experiences were different, Thomas felt a connection growing, a bridge forming between their worlds. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. Thomas realized that they needed to find a more secure place to rest. The wagon, though safer now, could not stay on the riverbank through the night. He looked around, searching for any sign of shelter, and then his eyes fell on a cluster of trees not far from the bank. The trees were dense, their branches heavy with snow, forming a natural windbreak. If they could make it there before darkness fell, they would have some protection from the freezing wind. "Follow me," Thomas said, gesturing toward the trees. "We can set up a small camp there for the night. The wind is worse out here." Naya moved with him, her steps careful, yet assured. Thomas noticed that she carried herself differently than he did, lighter, quieter, more aware of the land beneath her feet. She had the air of someone who had learned to survive in harsh conditions, someone who understood the silent language of snow and ice. Thomas felt both admiration and a strange sense of comfort in her presence. They reached the trees just as the sun began to vanish behind the horizon. Shadows stretched long, and the cold grew sharper. Thomas quickly gathered some dry branches from beneath the snow and started a small fire, using the matches he had tucked into his coat. Naya assisted, finding twigs and larger branches, arranging them carefully around the small blaze. The flames flickered to life, casting a warm glow on their faces, and Thomas felt the first real sense of safety since the morning. As they sat near the fire, warming their hands and thawing their fingers, Thomas studied Naya. She was quiet, but her eyes reflected intelligence, resilience, and a hint of humor. He realized that she had chosen to help him not out of obligation, but because it was the right thing to do. He felt a deep respect for her and a sense of gratitude that went beyond words. For a while, they simply watched the fire, listening to the soft whisper of the wind and the occasional crack of distant ice. Thomas felt a strange peace settle over him. In the midst of danger and isolation, he had found an unexpected companion. Someone who had saved his life and now shared this quiet moment with him. Finally, Thomas spoke again, his voice low and thoughtful. "Why did you help me?" he asked. It was a simple question, yet heavy with curiosity. Naya looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Sometimes help is needed," she said slowly. "Life fragile." Her words were simple, yet they carried weight. Thomas understood. She did not need to explain further. In the harshness of winter, in the face of danger, survival often required trust, courage, and compassion. Thomas nodded, feeling a strange warmth spread through him, not just from the fire but from the connection they had formed. I hope I can repay you someday," he said sincerely. Naya smiled faintly, a small gesture that made Thomas's heart lift. "Live, survive, that is enough," she replied. Her words were soft, but they resonated deeply. As night fell and the temperature dropped further, Thomas and Naya settled near the fire, sharing the small space of warmth. They did not speak much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with understanding and mutual respect. Thomas felt a new sense of hope that even in the harshest conditions, human kindness could survive, and that trust could be built even between strangers from very different worlds. The stars began to appear in the clear winter sky, twinkling coldly yet beautifully above them. Thomas looked up and realized that despite the dangers of the day, he had learned something important. Courage was not only about facing danger alone, but also about accepting help when it was offered and offering it when it was needed. Naya shifted slightly, her eyes scanning the trees and the river beyond, alert even in safety. Thomas understood that for her, survival was a constant awareness, a vigilance honed over years of living in the wild. He admired her skills and the quiet strength that radiated from her, and he realized that their paths had crossed not by accident, but perhaps because both had something to learn from each other. By the time the moon rose high in the sky, Thomas felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. The river, the ice, the danger, they were still out there, but for the moment he was safe. And beside him, Naya was also at peace, sharing in the quiet warmth of the fire. Thomas knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and perhaps new lessons. But for now, he allowed himself to relax, feeling the bond between them grow stronger with each passing moment. The plea he had shouted earlier, desperate, human, honest, had brought them together. And in the quiet of the snowy night, he realized that trust, courage, and compassion were perhaps the most important tools for surviving not just winter, but life itself. Morning broke slowly over the snowy landscape, casting pale light over the river and the forest beyond. Thomas Miller stirred from his thin blanket, the cold still clinging to him despite the small fire they had kept alive through the night. He stretched, trying to loosen the stiffness from his muscles, and glanced at Naya. She was already awake, crouched near the fire, arranging the remaining wood and scanning the horizon. Her eyes were sharp, alert, and full of the quiet confidence that had both saved and intrigued him the day before. Thomas realized how much he had come to rely on her presence, even in such a short time. The thought was new and strange. He had lived many years alone on the ranch, relying only on his own skills and instincts. Yet here, in the middle of winter on the banks of a frozen river, he felt an unexpected comfort in knowing that someone else was looking out for him. "Good morning," Thomas said, his voice still rough from the cold. He moved closer, rubbing his hands together near the fire. Naya looked up and nodded once, a small smile touching her lips. "Morning," she said softly. Her voice was calm, steady, and somehow reassuring. Thomas noticed how she moved with ease through the snow, her steps careful, measured, almost like she was part of the frozen landscape itself. He had never seen anyone so completely attuned to the land around them. Thomas quickly gathered the supplies from the wagon. They had to move soon. The ice, though safer now, would not remain reliable all day. Naya helped, her hands nimble and strong as she balanced baskets and secured the load. Thomas felt a growing admiration for her skill and efficiency. It was clear that she had spent her life navigating harsh environments, surviving where others might fail. And yet, despite her abilities, there was a warmth in her presence, a quiet kindness that made Thomas feel less alone. Once the supplies were ready, they began their trek toward the ranch. The path was difficult, snow deep and uneven, and the cold wind bit at their faces. Thomas kept close to Naya, learning to follow her lead. She moved confidently, stepping over obstacles, testing the snow with each footfall, and adjusting her path to avoid hidden dangers. Thomas realized how much he still had to learn about surviving in the wilderness, despite all his years as a rancher. As they walked, Thomas began to speak, partly to pass the time, partly to break the silence. "I've lived on this land for most of my life," he said. "I know the rivers, the hills, the animals, but the winter this year, it's different, harder." Naya listened, her expression unreadable but attentive. She did not interrupt, but Thomas felt that she understood every word. In a way, he realized the silence between them was as meaningful as the words they spoke. It was filled with shared experience, with mutual understanding born of hardship and survival. After a few hours, they reached a small clearing where the wind was slightly less fierce. Thomas took a moment to catch his breath and offered Naya some of the food he had brought. She accepted a small portion, eating quietly but efficiently. Thomas watched her, noticing how every movement was deliberate, how every action seemed purposeful. He wondered about her life, the skills she had learned, the experiences that had shaped her into the person she was now. "Do you live alone?" Thomas asked cautiously, curious about her story but aware of the boundaries between them. Naya paused, then shook her head slightly. "Sometimes alone, sometimes family," she said, her voice soft. The words were few, but Thomas sensed the depth behind them. She had learned to navigate a world that could be harsh and unforgiving, balancing independence with connection. He admired her resilience and the quiet strength that radiated from her every movement. As they continued their journey, the ranch came into view. The small cabin, surrounded by fences and scattered animals, looked like a haven amid the vast expanse of snow. Thomas felt a surge of relief and anticipation. He had been anxious about crossing the river and traveling through the forest, but now, seeing the familiar sight of home, he felt a sense of accomplishment. And yet, he knew that Naya's help had been indispensable. Without her guidance, he might not have made it this far. Upon reaching the ranch, Thomas quickly set about securing the animals and checking the fences. Daisy, his horse, nuzzled him affectionately, sensing his relief. Naya watched silently, her eyes scanning the surroundings, noting details Thomas might have overlooked. She moved through the space with quiet efficiency, helping him carry supplies, adjust gates, and tend to the animals. Thomas marveled at her skill and the ease with which she adapted to his world, a world so different from her own. By late morning, the ranch was in order, and Thomas finally allowed himself to sit and rest. Naya joined him, perching on a small log near the cabin. They shared a moment of quiet companionship, the fire crackling between them, the wind howling softly in the distance. Thomas felt a growing sense of gratitude and respect for her. She had not only saved his life but had also taught him lessons in patience, observation, and trust. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you," Thomas said finally, breaking the silence. "Someone so skilled, so brave, and yet so human." Naya tilted her head slightly, considering his words. "We survive, we help, that is life," she said simply. Her voice was calm, but Thomas felt the weight of her experience in every word. He understood that for her, survival was more than a matter of strength or luck. It was a way of living, a constant awareness of the world and its dangers. As the afternoon passed, Thomas and Naya began to share more stories. Thomas spoke of the ranch, of the years spent caring for the animals, of the quiet loneliness that sometimes accompanied life in such remote lands. Naya listened, occasionally offering a word or gesture of understanding. In turn, she shared fragments of her own experiences, stories of traveling across harsh terrain, of surviving storms and danger, of learning the ways of the land from her family. Though their worlds were different, Thomas felt a deep connection forming. The snow began to fall gently as evening approached, dusting the ranch in a soft, white blanket. Thomas felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. Despite the dangers of the river, the forest, and the winter, he had found a companion, someone who had shown him that trust and cooperation could exist even in the harshest conditions. That night, as they sat by the fire inside the small cabin, Thomas reflected on the events of the past 2 days. The river, the ice, the near-death experience, it all felt like a test, a challenge that had brought him and Naya together. He realized that courage was not just about facing danger alone, but also about allowing oneself to trust another, to accept help when it was offered, and to offer it in return. Naya moved quietly around the cabin, preparing a small space for herself near the fire. Thomas watched her, fascinated by her resourcefulness and calm demeanor. She seemed to belong here in this harsh, snowy world, yet she also seemed aware of the fragility of life, of the need to respect the land and the forces that governed it. As they settled for the night, Thomas felt a growing sense of admiration and connection. He knew that the days ahead would bring more challenges, more obstacles, and perhaps new lessons. Yet he also knew that with Naya by his side, he could face them with greater confidence and courage. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light across the small cabin. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence. Thomas looked at Naya and felt a quiet gratitude. She had saved his life, yes, but she had also reminded him of the power of trust, the importance of cooperation, and the strength that could be found in human connection. As the night deepened, Thomas drifted into sleep, the warmth of the fire and Naya's presence comforting him. He dreamed of the river of the ice and of the journey ahead, knowing that he was not alone. In the quiet of the snowy night, 2 strangers had become allies, bound by survival, trust, and the growing understanding that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was to rely on another. And so, as the wind howled outside and the snow continued to fall, Thomas Miller and Naya sat together, 2 souls connected by circumstance, courage, and the quiet promise of friendship in a world that could be harsh, unforgiving, and yet filled with unexpected warmth. The days that followed brought a rhythm to life on the ranch that Thomas had long taken for granted, but now seemed filled with new meaning. The snow, though still deep and relentless, was no longer just a challenge to survive. It became a shared journey between him and Nea. Each morning they rose early, the cold still biting at their faces, and worked together to care for the animals, check the fences, and gather firewood. Thomas noticed how naturally Nea moved through tasks, as if every action was part of a larger knowledge she had carried all her life. She had an uncanny ability to see potential dangers before they happened, whether it was thin ice near the river or weak spots in the fence. Thomas began to rely on her instincts as much as his own. Despite their growing cooperation, there were moments of tension. Nea's ways were different, shaped by a life in the wild, where rules were unwritten and caution was constant. Thomas, a man of routine and careful planning, sometimes struggled to understand her methods. Yet each disagreement was mild, solved with patience, gestures, and the silent understanding that both were working toward the same goal: survival and safety. Over time, these moments became small lessons, teaching Thomas to see the world through her eyes, to respect the instincts honed by her life in the wilderness. One morning, after a particularly heavy snowfall, Thomas and Nea set out to inspect the fences near the river. The snow was thick, and the cold wind howled through the bare trees. The ice on the river had shifted overnight, creating new cracks and dangerous spots. Thomas paused, studying the frozen surface, remembering the terror of the day they had first met. Nea watched him, her expression calm but alert, waiting for him to make his move. "This looks tricky," Thomas said, pointing to a section where the ice was thin and jagged. "I don't think we should risk crossing here." Nea nodded, scanning the area with careful eyes. She bent down, testing the snow with her foot, and motioned toward a narrower stretch of the river where the ice seemed more stable. "Here, safer," she said. Her voice was quiet but confident. Thomas trusted her judgment without hesitation. Together, they guided the animals away from the dangerous ice and toward the safer path. Thomas marveled at her ability to read the land, to sense its dangers in a way he never could on his own. As they continued their work, a sense of camaraderie grew between them. Thomas began to speak more freely, sharing stories from his past, tales of life on the ranch, the challenges of managing cattle in winter, and the quiet loneliness that often accompanied his work. Nea listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes offering a word of insight or a gesture that spoke volumes. He realized that though their languages and cultures were different, they shared a common understanding. The world was harsh, and survival required courage, patience, and respect for each other. One afternoon, a sudden snowstorm blew in from the west, transforming the landscape into a white blur. Thomas realized they could not safely return to the cabin without risking frostbite or worse. Nea, sensing his concern, gestured toward a small grove of trees nearby. "Shelter here," she said. They moved quickly, guiding the animals with them. The grove, though not a permanent solution, provided some protection from the wind. As they huddled together for warmth, Thomas felt a growing sense of trust and affection for Nea. Her presence was calming, steadying him in a way he had not expected. He realized that beyond her survival skills, her courage and kindness had touched him deeply. They shared a quiet meal of bread and dried meat, the storm raging around them, yet inside the grove, they were safe. That night, as the storm subsided and the sky cleared, Thomas and Nea returned to the cabin. The world outside was transformed into a sparkling winter wonderland, the snow reflecting the moonlight. Thomas marveled at the beauty, and Nea smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the light. For the first time, Thomas saw her not just as a guide or a helper, but as a person with her own thoughts, feelings, and stories. The following days brought more challenges. Wolves were sighted near the outskirts of the ranch, and the ice on the river remained unpredictable. Yet Thomas no longer felt fear in the same way. With Nea by his side, he felt prepared, capable, and confident. He began to notice small ways in which she influenced him. The careful way she examined the snow, the patience with which she approached the animals, the quiet strength that radiated from her. He found himself learning from her, adapting his own methods, and appreciating the wisdom she brought into his life. Their bond continued to deepen in subtle ways. Thomas noticed how Nea's eyes followed the movements of the animals, how she seemed to anticipate their needs before they acted. He began to trust her instincts more than his own in certain situations, realizing that her life experiences had honed abilities he could not hope to match. And in turn, Nea seemed to grow more comfortable around him, her initial caution giving way to a quiet companionship. She would offer a small smile, a word of encouragement, or a gentle laugh when Thomas made a clumsy mistake. These small gestures, though simple, created a sense of warmth and connection that neither had expected when they first met on the ice. One particularly cold morning, Thomas and Nea were repairing a section of the fence near the edge of the property when they were caught in a sudden blizzard. The wind howled fiercely, snow whipping into their faces, reducing visibility to just a few feet. Thomas felt the cold biting through his coat, and he realized that the storm was stronger than any they had faced before. He turned to Nea, ready to suggest retreat, but she was already moving calmly, her gestures guiding him to follow her lead. They found shelter in a small hollow behind a cluster of rocks, a place that offered some protection from the wind. Nea quickly gathered snow to create a barrier, using her knowledge of the land to make the space as safe as possible. Thomas watched her work, impressed by her resourcefulness and presence of mind. He realized that her guidance had saved them once again. In the face of danger, she remained composed, focused, and practical, while he often found himself reacting first and thinking later. As they huddled together for warmth, Thomas felt a new layer of respect and gratitude. He understood that their journey was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, cooperation, and learning from each other. Nea had shown him that courage was not just physical but also mental and emotional. She had taught him patience, observation, and the importance of humility in the face of nature's power. By the time the storm passed, Thomas and Nea were exhausted but safe. The ranch, though battered by the weather, remained intact, and the animals were unharmed. Thomas looked at Nea, feeling a deep sense of admiration and gratitude. She had become more than a guide or helper. She had become a companion, someone who shared his challenges and victories, and who had helped him grow in ways he could not have imagined. The following weeks passed with a mixture of routine and adventure. Thomas and Nea worked together to repair fences, feed animals, and navigate the icy terrain. They shared quiet moments by the fire, learning about each other's lives, cultures, and experiences. Thomas discovered that Nea had traveled far and faced many dangers before arriving at his ranch. Her stories, though sparse and measured, revealed a life of courage, resilience, and wisdom. In turn, Nea learned about Thomas's life on the ranch, the long winters, and the challenges of managing livestock alone. She listened intently, asking questions and offering observations that demonstrated her understanding of the land and the animals. Through these exchanges, both began to appreciate not just each other's skills, but also their perspectives, values, and experiences. As winter slowly began to give way to early signs of spring, Thomas realized how much he had changed. He was more patient, more observant, and more appreciative of the world around him. Nea had not only saved his life but had also opened his eyes to new ways of thinking, seeing, and surviving. Their bond had grown stronger, rooted in trust, shared experience, and mutual respect. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Thomas and Nea stood together near the edge of the ranch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold. The air was still cold, but there was a sense of peace and accomplishment. Thomas realized that the dangers they had faced, The river, the blizzards, the frozen terrain were no longer sources of fear, but opportunities for growth and connection. Naya turned to him, her expression calm and thoughtful. "We survived together," she said. Her words were simple, but they carried deep meaning. Thomas nodded, understanding the truth in them. Survival was no longer just about enduring the cold or avoiding danger. It was about cooperation, trust, and the bond they had formed. Thomas smiled, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the fire and much to do with the presence of another human being who had become his friend, guide, and ally. "Yes," he said softly, "together." And in that moment, as the winter light faded and the first hints of spring touched the land, Thomas and Naya stood side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their journey was far from over, but the bond they had forged in the harshest of conditions would carry them forward, a testament to courage, trust, and the quiet strength that comes from facing life together. Spring began slowly, cautiously, as if nature itself was unsure after the harsh winter they had endured. The snow still lingered in patches, but new shoots of green peeked through the frozen ground. Thomas Miller stood outside his cabin, inhaling the crisp air, feeling a sense of relief and accomplishment. The ranch, once threatened by icy rivers and relentless snowstorms, was finally safe. Yet the safety felt different this time, not just because the land was secure, but because of the presence beside him. Naya had stayed through the winter, her guidance and strength having transformed the dangerous season into a story of survival, learning, and trust. The morning light glinted off the melting river, turning it into a ribbon of silver that wound through the ranch's boundary. Thomas gazed at it with quiet gratitude. He remembered the first time he had crossed it, terrified, unsure if he would survive. Now, standing with Naya nearby, he realized how much he had grown, how much the winter had changed him. More than that, he understood the depth of the bond they had formed, a connection born not from obligation, but from shared trials, trust, and mutual respect. "Thomas," Naya said softly, drawing his attention. She had been observing the ice with careful eyes, noting the thinner spots, the currents beneath the water, and the patches that might still be dangerous despite the thaw. Her gaze was calm, thoughtful, and full of the quiet authority that had guided him through so many hazards. Thomas admired her skill and intuition, understanding that it was her knowledge and careful attention that had kept them alive. "Yes, Naya," he asked, smiling at her. "The river's still tricky," she said simply. "Careful." Her words were few, but their meaning was clear. Even with the ice melting, the river demanded respect. Thomas nodded, feeling a renewed sense of caution and awareness. Winter had taught him many lessons, and he now knew that nature's beauty often masked its dangers. The days passed with a new rhythm. Thomas and Naya worked together to repair fences weakened by ice, to ensure the animals were fed, and to prepare for the warmer months ahead. Each day brought small challenges: a cow wandering too close to the river, a fence post loose from frost, sudden patches of ice forming unexpectedly. Yet Thomas no longer felt fear in the same way. He had learned to anticipate, observe, and trust not only his own instincts but also Naya's. Their teamwork had become seamless, a dance of cooperation shaped by experience and necessity. In the quiet moments between work, they shared conversations, laughter, and stories. Thomas learned about Naya's childhood, her family, and the lessons she had learned from traveling across rugged lands. Naya, in turn, discovered more about Thomas's life as a rancher, the quiet struggles, the long nights alone, and the pride he took in caring for his animals and land. Though their worlds had been very different, they found common ground in respect for life, resilience in hardship, and the understanding that survival often depended on the people around them. One morning, Thomas noticed a subtle change in the light on the horizon. The snow was melting faster, the days were longer, and the first signs of spring flowers appeared along the edges of the fields. The animals seemed more energetic, and even Daisy, his mare, carried herself with renewed vigor. It was a season of renewal, a sign that the hardships of winter were ending. Thomas felt hope not only for the ranch but also for the bond he had formed with Naya. As they worked together near the riverbank, Thomas paused and turned to Naya. "I've been thinking," he said. "Winter was harsh, but it taught me something important, not just about surviving the cold but about trusting, learning, and caring." Naya looked at him, her expression calm yet curious. "Yes," she asked softly. Thomas smiled, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and admiration. "I couldn't have made it without you. You saved my life, guided me, and taught me so much." He paused, struggling to find words that truly captured his feelings. "I am thankful, more than I can say." Naya's lips curved into a faint smile. She did not speak immediately, but Thomas felt her acknowledgement in the quiet strength of her presence. Then she said simply, "Help each other, always." Her words were sparse, yet they carried profound meaning. Thomas understood that she was not speaking only of survival, but of the deeper connection forged through trust, courage, and shared experience. As spring continued to unfold, Thomas realized that the ranch had become more than just a place to live. It was a space where he had learned about resilience, friendship, and respect. Naya's presence had changed his perspective, showing him the value of collaboration and empathy, and teaching him lessons that went far beyond mere survival. Every day spent working together strengthened not only the ranch, but also the bond between them. Then came a day that marked a turning point. Naya stood near the edge of the property, observing the distant hills. Thomas noticed a hint of restlessness in her stance, a subtle tension in her shoulders. He approached her, curious but cautious. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Naya shook her head slowly. "No, just time to go," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of sadness. Thomas felt a pang of understanding. Their journey together, though life-changing, could not last forever. Naya had her own path, and he respected that. "But you helped me through everything," Thomas said softly. "You saved my life, guided me through the worst winter I've ever faced. You've become important to me." His words were honest, heartfelt, carrying the weight of months of shared experience. Naya met his gaze, her dark eyes steady and reflective. "Important, yes. Remember, survive. Care, that is gift," she said. Thomas understood. Her way of expressing gratitude and emotion was quiet, measured, yet full of sincerity. She had given him not only guidance and protection, but also the gift of perspective. Lessons in courage, trust, and human connection that he would carry forever. Before leaving, Naya reached into her pouch and pulled out a small handcrafted pendant, a symbol of protection and remembrance. She handed it to Thomas, her fingers brushing his briefly. "For you, remember," she said. Thomas took it, feeling the weight of its meaning. It was more than a token. It was a symbol of the bond they had forged, a reminder of the courage, trust, and compassion that had defined their shared winter. The day Naya left, Thomas felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude. He watched her disappear into the snow-dusted forest, her figure blending with the landscape she had mastered so well. Though she was leaving, her presence remained with him, in the lessons she had taught, the skills she had shared, and the quiet strength that had inspired him. In the days and weeks that followed, Thomas reflected on the winter that had brought them together. He remembered the frozen river, the cracked ice, the desperation that had led him to call out for help. He thought of Naya's courage, her wisdom, and her calm determination in the face of danger. Most of all, he remembered the connection that had formed between them, a bond built on trust, respect, and shared experience. The ranch continued to thrive. The animals were healthy, the fences secure, and the fields ready for spring planting. Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose and hope, knowing that he had survived not just through his own strength, but through cooperation and trust. He carried Naya's lessons with him in every task, every decision, and every step across the land he loved. Months later, Thomas found himself walking along the riverbank. The pendant Naya had given him resting against his chest. He smiled, remembering the words she had spoken. Help each other, survive, that is life. Those words, simple yet profound, had shaped him in ways he could never have anticipated. He understood now that true courage and survival were not only about facing danger, but also about trusting, connecting, and learning from others. Thomas knew that the story of his winter with Naya would remain with him forever. It was a story of near loss and triumph, of fear and courage, of strangers becoming allies, and of lessons that extended far beyond survival. He realized that the winter had changed him, not just as a rancher, but as a person. He had learned to see the world with new eyes, to value connection and empathy, and to understand that sometimes the bravest act is to trust another human being. As he looked out over the river, now flowing gently with the thawing spring, Thomas felt a quiet sense of peace. The ice was gone, the snow receding, and the land was coming alive once more. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he also knew that he had the strength, knowledge, and perspective to face them. And in his heart, he carried the memory of Naya, the Apache woman who had taught him that survival was not only about courage, but about connection, trust, and compassion. Thomas smiled, feeling the warmth of gratitude and understanding fill him. He whispered softly to the wind, "Thank you for everything." And in that moment, with the river flowing, the ranch alive, and spring returning to the land, he felt the truth of the lesson that had shaped his life. Sometimes, to truly live, one must open their heart, trust another, and embrace the unexpected gift of human connection.